I'm practicing Zazen meditation. I'm thinking of trying to channel the chi energy and see if I can talk about the process of what occurs while practicing Zazen meditation. Sorry, it might take a few seconds here. What I noticed is that I can forget about the benefits of meditation, which is completely crazy and absurd because meditation is so very valuable. It makes no sense that I would be able to forget how important it is. And it seems like as you get further into Zen practice, that you actually use the absolute bodhicitta mind less often, and you become even more like a regular person, more and more. I don't know how you would say that exactly, but like you use the absolute bodhicitta less often. Absolute bodhicitta is absolute bodhicitta is realizing that the ego is non-existent, insubstantial, and so once you've learned about absolute bodhicitta, you no longer feel like you have to hang out in that state all the time, and you let go of it, I guess, because you know that you always have access to it, and that everyone always has access to it, they just don't know it. So there wasn't actually a word for Buddhism originally. Well, while Buddhism was being developed, or centuries, I don't know how many centuries it took for them to start using a word like Buddhism, but there wasn't any word for it. People just talked about it without having a word for it. So once you meditate enough, you become so confident in the reality of absolute bodhicitta that you can become a completely ordinary person at that point. You're the most ordinary person around. I think that every different person has a different, unique perspective of this kind of a meditative practice. Everybody has something unique to bring to the table, and everyone is valuable, I guess, for that reason. So the selflessness of a person comes up a lot. I think it's impossible to truly, completely forget once you access equipoise, when you access the path of seeing, the path of meditation, and the path of no more learning, and spend some time there, hang out in the path of no more learning. I think you can forget about it, but you never completely forget about it. I think it's impossible to completely forget about it. You just sort of might be like lazy, and then you kind of might surprise yourself, and you might be like slightly anxious or upset or something, and then you remember the path of seeing at a moment like when you're anxious, and it's kind of like interesting how you can go from being like somewhat upset to remembering, I guess you would call it enlightenment. But if you spend enough time in Zen centers, meditating with people, at a certain point, you have, I guess you call it, it's called divine pride, where you're certain of the truth of the Dharma, and you just become certain that the Dharma is a real thing. it seems in a way almost crazy to not lead a monastic life if you're exposed to these kinds of teachings, because they're so valuable. And I think some people see more than others how valuable Dharma teachings are. Some people might like be exposed to it slightly and then not really value it very much. I think when I heard about it, I sort of was like drawn into it a lot pretty quickly. After I kind of got the message. But then what I'm trying to say also is there's this phrase like, when you get the message, hang up the phone. So it's not really, it's like what I was saying earlier, like it's not about doing like zazen rituals every day, because once you learn about absolute bodhicitta, you can completely refrain from doing zazen rituals, and because you're already sure that the way the mind and body and universe function is dharmic, that the Dharma is a real teaching thing, a real teaching. So when you get the message, hang up the phone, I guess means you can read books and play music and learn foreign languages and exercise, do yoga. You don't have to sit in zazen, like 40 minutes every morning. I think initially a person has to do that kind of a rigid zazen ritual. Some people, maybe a lot of people, might require a rigid zazen ritual in order to get the message, but then once you get the message and hang up the phone, you can be doing zazen all the time while you're doing other stuff like reading books and things. And then like each of us have our own karma, which is, we can't necessarily communicate it to anyone, and we just have to live out our lives, the karma of our lives, in the most noble way that we know how to. And everyone has different karma, and I'm not sure what to say about communication. I think there's a mindful way to communicate, and when we practice zazen, we become more graceful in our communication. But essentially, the important part that I'm trying to point out is that once you discover the higher levels of Zen and Tibetan meditation, once you access those and hang out in those states, it becomes stages rather than states, and And it's impossible to forget if you do access those states and stages. It's impossible to forget, although we might kind of forget. You can remind yourself. You won't ever completely forget. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.